Shout out to this fan for coming up with the idea to this video. If you have any cool ideas for a future video, let me know in the comments below. I may just give you a shout out.
3, 2, 1.
What's up, my Net Soldiers? I'm the Net Alliance, and today I'm going to be doing a video on just Star Wars The Clone Wars. Now, every so often I add a little bit of The Clone Wars into one of my videos here and there, but I never actually do a video on The Clone Wars itself, either reviewing it or my thoughts on it, or if I'm sad that it's canceled or this and that. So let's talk about it. Now, before I dive in about my opinions of its cancellation, let me just say, the first season 1 through 3, they were very kiddish to me. In fact, I was pretty excited when I heard Star Wars The Clone Wars was coming to Cartoon Network. And although I was somewhat excited about the TV show, by that point I was starting high school and I wanted to be cool, and kids who were cool didn't like Star Wars. Of course, as I got older, I said, who the heck cares if I like Star Wars? Honestly, why do I care what other people think? And so I started liking Star Wars when it came out around that time. So I actually tried watching the first season of Clone Wars, and I ended up not really liking it because not only was it just not the same as the prequels, which were my films I grew up with, especially episode 3, but it just felt too kiddish to me, which makes sense because it was on Cartoon Network. However, as time went on, the show kind of aged along with its audience. And around the time they reintroduced Darth Maul into the series is when I started jumping on the Clone Wars bandwagon. I don't know if that was season 4 or season 5, but at some point, as soon as they introduced Darth Maul back into the series, that's when I jumped on and I loved it. In fact, even to this day, I can't watch season 1 through 3. I try my best, and I do eventually muster the courage to go through and do it, but it just is so different compared to the later seasons. And of course, you may feel different from that, but that's okay. This is just a video on my opinion. And we're all allowed to have different opinions. That's how the world works. Unless you live in North Korea, in which case you just gotta listen to whatever Kim Jong-un says. But anywho, when Darth Maul was reintroduced into the Star Wars Clone Wars, he also brought the sense of maturity along with him. Because around the same time Darth Maul came into the show, a lot of people started dying. Especially the scenes with Darth Maul actually in them. For an example, the one Jedi Council member named Adi Gallia, she actually gets stabbed by Savage Opress's horns, which is pretty insane. And then later in that season, Maul actually cuts off Pre Vizsla's head. So yeah, that's pretty violent for a kid's show, especially for Cartoon Network standards. So where I feel Star Wars The Clone Wars season 1 through 12 was kind of aiming towards the 8 to 12 year old range. As the seasons went on, we saw season 4, which got a little more violent, and then season 5 got even more mature. By that point, the 12-year-old is going to be like 16, and the 8-year-old is going to be 12 or 13. So when it comes down to it, it makes sense for why they would try to age it along with their age group. And it worked because it got people like me on board, and I didn't like Clone Wars from the start, so there you go. Now it begs the question, if the show was that good and it was getting even better through every single season, why was it canceled? Now I actually got this question a bunch of times in different shapes and forms over the last few months. And although I could tell you that Clone Wars is just getting old, it's been on TV for too long, it's just time for something new, and that's why they brought in Star Wars Rebels. The truth is, once Disney acquired Star Wars from George Lucas, Star Wars as a whole was now Disney's property. And if you remember, Clone Wars is on Cartoon Network. And of course you could raise the point, well, if it's on Cartoon Network, why don't they just take the Clone Wars and put it on Disney Channel? Which is something they could have done, but they're not going to. And here's a couple reasons why. First off, Clone Wars has been on Cartoon Network for the last few years, and essentially Clone Wars is established with Cartoon Network. So Disney Channel doesn't want a sign of their competitor competing on their channel. People would still associate Clone Wars with Cartoon Network because Clone Wars was on Cartoon Network for its entirety of its run. It was on Netflix too, but it was aired on Cartoon Network. Now my second reason for why Disney canceled the Clone Wars is because, real quick, just take a look at all the marketing Disney is doing right now for Star Wars. Look at all the prequel characters they're making. Oh wait, they're not? Oh, that's right, because they're trying to push the prequels away from the entire saga. And the reason why is because the prequels were just not overly loved by everybody. And you could say, well, the Clone Wars aren't technically the prequels. You know, they're in the prequels era, but they're not the prequels. Which is true, the Star Wars TV show is not the Star Wars prequel movies. But you have to remember the Clone Wars are based within the prequels, right? And so, no matter which way you cut it, Clone Wars is always going to be associated with the prequel trilogy. And if Disney's just trying to focus on what's happening with the original trilogy because that's the most loved trilogy, and everything beyond that, which is essentially their universe, they're going to remove all things that associate with the prequel trilogy. And so that means the Clone Wars has to go. And so it did. Now at the time the Clone Wars being canceled, season 6 was actually being worked on. In fact, it actually had to be cut down because it got canceled midway between its production. And then Netflix later released season 6 on their platform. But apparently the Clone Wars TV show was only supposed to run for 7 seasons. So even though season 6 of the Star Wars Clone Wars was affected by the actual purchase of Star Wars to Disney, it could have been a completely different season. And of course, it was canceled before season 7 could be created. So even if you count the current season 6 as the actual season 6, There's a whole season of Clone Wars missing. So now this begs the question, should Disney have let Clone Wars finish out its series? Personally, in my opinion, I think they should have. Not just stemming from a fan, but also from a business standpoint. When it comes to making a business and you're trying to make a statement, making the Rebels was one thing because they want to associate themselves with their own TV show and not Cartoon Network's The Clone Wars. But what you're doing by canceling the Clone Wars cold turkey is hurting your fans. So in one way, I can see why Disney did it, but another way, I just don't think they thought enough about it. Now, if I was in charge of the whole Disney purchase, I would have let the Star Wars Clone Wars Season 7 roll out, finish off the series, say goodbye to it, let the fans have their final series, and then begin the Star Wars Rebels. Because doing this would allow the Star Wars Clone Wars fans to not be as burned about it, and then they might actually show back up for the Star Wars Rebels. I honestly think that would have been a much smarter business decision, because now, although Star Wars Rebels is only in Season 3, you still have the Star Wars Clone Wars fans complaining about how they never got their series finished. And essentially, Disney just had one more season of Clone Wars to go, so they should have just let that last season go, finished off the series, made their fans happy, allowed there to be a conclusion, and then that was it, and then they can start Star Wars Rebels. But of course, that's just my opinion. Let me know your opinion in the comments below. Would you have liked to see a Season 7 of Clone Wars? Do you not really care? Do you prefer Rebels more than Clone Wars? Which one is your favorite one? Or do you like them all the same? Let me know in the comments below. Please remember to like and subscribe for more videos, you guys, and until next time, I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.